What's up, guys? This is Sean from Lineup Logic NBA Daily Fantasy Podcast. I wanted to make you guys a quick tutorial video here talking about some of my favorite research tools that you may or may not know about. A lot of times people, sometimes wonder how do you figure this stuff out? So I'm going to give you guys a series of a couple videos with some tools, some recommendations of how you can use these different tools, to help your decision making as you're going through your lineup creation process. So let's say, for example, you're here. By the way, this is one of my favorite sources for DVP information, mostly because it sorts so easily for on the season, last 5 games and last 10 games right here. But let's say you're looking through DVP, you're looking through the slate, you determine that you really like a matchup for a particular player. We're looking at center here, you know, um, but you want to understand a little bit more about what that possibility might hold for that player. So you're going to want to look into that player's history, that player's current situation, understanding, you know, why it is that this is probably a good matchup beyond just DVP. So you can do that through two of my favorite player pages. I'm going to do that real quick. So let's say center-wise, we like a player like Karl Anthony Towns, but Karl Anthony Towns isn't a guy that you are really familiar with. Maybe you haven't played him a lot, or for whatever reason, uh, that's a departure from the stud that you were thinking you were going to play, right? So you want to be sure that you're making a good investment. So we flip over to the NBA stats page, which is just stats.nba.com, which is excellent, okay? Um, and we're just going to type in Karl Anthony Towns. Okay, Towns is going to pop right up. Now, on his profile page, you're going to see averages. You're going to see traditional splits, average minutes, points, etc. Okay, for each season that he's had. But this is where I kind of like, for our purposes, to go click down here, and I'll click on fantasy. Fantasy is all FanDuel driven. FanDuel is partnered with the NBA. So this is all FanDuel numbers. We don't even have to switch between DraftKings and FanDuel. They're going to give me some blurbs here for RotoWire. They're going to give me some upcoming games. They're going to give me this pretty easy to read bar. That's basically giving me the blue columns are his averages for the season. Gray column, average in the last 5 games, right? And what we can do here really nicely is just kind of compare. Where is he trending? Is he trending up right now? Is he trending down? Where should I expect his price to be? How has he performed, in the last couple games? And here's some quick, easy to notice. Okay, he's +2 in the last 5 games on a season average, specifically +4 scoring, probably because of the absence of Zach LaVine. So that's an interesting note. We'll go down there from there real quick, and we can get a really nice overall picture of his splits. And the really nice thing is that, okay, it's regular splits, but then they add in this column over here, which shows you on the far right how many FanDuel points that results in, right? Okay, so we know his season average. Great. Well, let's look at his home road splits. 47 versus 39. Okay, whoa, that is a massive 8-point jump. And we know then, okay, Towns with Sky, we want a roster at home. Absolutely. Okay, great. Last 5 games, we already looked at that. Last 10 games, 46. That's even better. And then we look at the splits as far as rest goes, right? This is 0 days. This is a back-to-back. Okay, he's fine on a back-to-back, slightly below average, kind of what you would expect. On a single day of rest, that's where he's at his best, right? 2 days of rest, that's kind of a weird sample size. Who knows why that's so low? But doesn't matter. We know that maybe on 1 day of rest, that's when Towns is the best. Maybe we avoid him on back-to-backs and we prefer him coming off a day of rest. Then we can look at specific game logs. So let's say, for example, we want to determine, he just had a game against Denver last week. We wanted to understand how he's played against Denver. So I'm going to just go alphabetically, scroll down. How's he averaged against Denver? Holy shit. He's averaged 52 points on the season against Denver. We know that. Denver struggles against the front court and the center. They're a pace-up team. So, okay, great. That means Towns really is not in a bad situation given his matchup history against Denver. But here's a couple things that I really like to do to try and get a better sense of a player. Now, let's say, for example, this is a player you're really not familiar with. Maybe they're going to be coming into some minutes. You're kind of unsure of how they might perform. You can do a couple things for that. One is you can sort by minutes. Okay, so let's say, for example, we know that a player is going to come into a lot of minutes off the bench. Well, how have they performed when they get all of those minutes? For Towns, this isn't really a thing. He averages pretty consistently about 37, 38 minutes, right? We can see that pretty clearly. But for a lot of players, when you sort by their maximum minutes games, what you're going to start to see is what happens when they're in these starting roles or in these roles where there's other people out, and that's not a substitute for the on-off tool. It's just a little bit more context for you. Okay. The other thing that you can do, what I like to do sometimes is when I'm considering a player is I'll click on the FanDuel and I'll sort from top to bottom here and I'll understand where their ceiling opportunities are. Okay. What this is going to allow me to do is it's going to allow me to try to determine when this player is at his best. Okay. And obviously in most cases it's plus matchup plus pace. Well, that's certainly the case for Towns here. Rockets are plus pace team plus matchup for front court. Boston, New York as well. And then you have this interesting one, Indiana. Well, maybe that tells me a little bit something about Miles Turner's defense. He can't handle Karl Anthony Towns. Whatever the case may be, these are the situations where we're going to see ceiling opportunities for Towns. And the reverse is also true. Who is the team that actually struggles, where has Towns struggled, right? Interestingly enough, we see Pistons, Grizzlies. That makes sense. Gasol and Drummond are two of the better defensive centers in the league. New Orleans, interesting. Maybe he struggles with Davis's size. That's something to keep a note of. And these are kind of anecdotal pieces of evidence. When you study these guys' game logs, you get to understand who they are and where they succeed and where they struggle a little bit better. And this is kind of a useful way to look at it. Okay, so this is the fantasy page, like I said, on NBA.com. That's a really easy way to get a quick look at, I'm trying to go back, there it is, quick look at, a single player's fantasy value in a certain situation. Now, there's a lot more stuff you can do with NBA.com, and there really are pretty impressive statistical tools here. I won't dive into all those right now, but this is really my favorite button, and it's the quickest and easiest one to use for our purpose. Okay, so the other one that I really like, and you guys have heard me talk about this, is Fantasy 5x5. So this is the dashboard page for Fantasy 5x5. Obviously, if you're news, there's nothing up because there's no games today. But you've got your injury boards, your live updates, injury boosts, projected matchups, and then, you've got a couple more research tools, right? Perfect lineup stuff, research, DVP, everything that you like here. And then the Twitter follow, of course, following Fantasy 5x5. But let's say you go ahead and you want to look a little bit more into Karl Anthony Towns. Let's do the same one. So I pop up Towns here, got a nice news blurb on him, okay? Here's where Fantasy 5x5 really, really hits the design, like the really nice design stuff. What they've got here is you've got this basic bar graph, right? You can turn on and turn off the different things that you see here. Okay, so let's say games, you want to understand minutes first. Okay, that's a little bit of context here all the way back to the beginning of the season. Fantasy points. Okay, so we can see where his ceiling game occurred on the 30th, right? He had 75 fantasy points. All right, I can see how many attempts he has. So let's say, for example, I'm trying to understand how many attempts he has in usual games, but then I can look at rebounds. I can add rebounds in there. Okay. The nice thing about this is that you can see when players are spiking. You can see when players are slumping. You can see when players are, doing more on the peripheral side because you can turn on assists, points, steals, blocks, three-pointers, turnovers, etc. Okay. If you're trying to better understand Here's what also really like. The did not play mode. This is the fantasy 5x5 version of the on-off tool. Okay. When Karl Anthony Towns did or didn't play, this is how he would affect his teammates. Well, Karl Anthony Towns has played every single game this year, so we don't really have to worry about that. But let's look into what happens when other people don't play and Towns is on the court. Okay. So when Towns is on the court and other players don't play, so let's say, for example, Zach LaVine. When Zach LaVine did play, Towns was averaging 43 fantasy points. That's the green bar. When Zach LaVine doesn't play, Towns is averaging 48 points. Now it's the last 10 games, basically, and since LaVine went down with the knee. Okay, so this is kind of a really quick and easy tool to see how these guys affect each other. And you also have the sample size, right? If this was only one game, then okay, it wouldn't really matter. For example, the Chris Dunn data, not really that interested in the Chris Dunn data because Chris Dunn really hasn't played that many games here for the Wolves, right? He hasn't started. He's played minutes, but he hasn't started and had significant minutes there. The other really nice thing you can quickly and easily do is see teammate stackability. This means who does this guy pair with really, really well, meaning how do they affect each other's fantasy performances positively or negatively? Well, for positive, you really want to slide down to the left here. And we see that Rubio and Towns are a really nice correlation. Okay, very strong correlation. They're 2.7 correlation. They have a 2.8 fantasy point impact on each other. That actually is really a lot if you're looking at correlations in fantasy sports. We notice he doesn't really have a positive impact on Wiggins necessarily, but he does have a positive correlation with him. Interesting. But then you slide down here. This makes sense, right? We know that Zach LaVine and him have a negative impact on each other because the scoring shifts over to Towns when LaVine is off the court. So that makes sense to us. So if you ever wanted to stack a player with Towns, then it would be Rubio. The other nice thing is you scroll down here, you've got the same game log as you did on the NBA site. A little bit different read, but very similar results. You've got all your FanDuel points, of course, DraftKings and Yahoo, if you're into that kind of stuff. Summarized in the last 5, of course. And then at the top, you have the season averages. These jive with exactly what NBA.com said, right? We know that it was 43 over the season, 45 in the last 5. Let's look specifically, though, at maybe one of those Denver games. We knew he's averaging 52 against Denver. Holy smokes, he had 61 game against Denver. He had 44 against Denver, about his average. Looking for that Denver logo. 55 against Denver one game. Okay, so he's definitely exceeded value twice against Denver. On 51, he's exceeded value 3 times against Denver, and the lowest game that he had against Denver was his season average. You can feel pretty good at starting Karl Anthony Towns against the Nuggets. You know what his situation is against the Nuggets. So again, NBA.com and Fantasy 5x5, excellent player pages when you want to get a little bit more detail about the player that you're thinking of rostering. Hit me up with any questions, guys, on Twitter. Enjoy the video. If you have any deeper questions about how to use player pages and what kind of other things you should look for, let me know.